Welcome back for another episode of Cyber Conversations. Today, I am very excited to be joined by Kristopher Schroeder, who is founder and CEO of Replica Cyber. Now, if you haven't heard of Replica, they're tackling a really interesting problem around high-risk digital work, everything from AI experimentation and investigations through to M&A and sensitive strategic projects. And what happens when businesses move faster than the environment's designed to secure them? They've also just released some really interesting research about what they're calling the expectation economy, which basically shows that security exceptions have become standard operating procedures inside modern enterprises. So, we're going to unpack quite a bit today, as you can probably imagine. But before we dive into all of that, Chris, it's such a pleasure to have you here with me. Why don't you maybe kickstart and set the foundations with introducing yourself and telling us a little bit more about who you are?
Thanks, Katie. And I'm excited to be here and looking forward to all the topics for today's conversation. I'll just give a brief background. I'm co-founder, CEO of Replica. We established ourselves, we're a certified B Corp with the public mission to protect life online. That's anything that we do is really underneath that. My co-founder and I came from a space for years and most of my career in trying to defeat adversaries that are trying to compromise the US, our allies in the digital space. We were doing that work for years, and all we saw was the tremendous problems with the exposure of information, exposure of people, their activities, and no tools and no solutions were really keeping up with that problem. We decided we had to leave our previous jobs or our previous lives to go really make a difference in protecting individuals, protecting organizations, operating in the digital space. And that's why Replica was founded. So now we've got 24 patents around how you do that at scale for global organizations, like global financial organizations, healthcare systems, government agencies, US and others, all the way to just general business. Anybody that's operating and doing any significant work, how do we protect and enable that activity, that work to happen, right? And what we've seen recently is that has expanded to be we're not just protecting humans, we have to consider agents and AI in that realm as well. And I know we'll talk about that later in this recording. While that has changed, the world has seemed to have changed around us. That still is the same thing that we were designed to protect. Our AI was a part of our first patent that was issued in 2018. It is core to our who we are and what we're working for. And so that just seems to be a natural evolution of Replica.
Fantastic overview. And I think you briefly touched base on this, and obviously you and your co-founder took that leap. But I'd be interested to explore, is probably a better way to say that, like where Replica came from in the sense that what was that kind of light bulb moment where you were like, oh, okay, we recognize that there's something here that needs building, but being confident enough to also be like, I think we also can really just dive all into this because that's a
Right.
risky move, but obviously that's the entrepreneurial life.
It was, we knew we were solving a problem for a very specific set of customers in the government space, but that's not a business. That is just, okay, go solve this problem. We had confidence that there was a bigger problem that we were addressing and solving. We didn't know at the time when we first started, before we even left our previous jobs, we didn't know exactly what that was going to solve for the world. But once you jump full time into it, that's when these other problems and adjacent problems start to appear to you. So while you're protecting online activities for government research and investigations, well, there's a direct correlation to financial services. And they're trying to do counter fraud and fraud disruption. And even on their global financial crime teams from some of the larger banks, so okay, global financial crimes, that makes sense, trying to disrupt those international criminal activities. Sometimes that goes down into actually countering sex trafficking, which you wouldn't expect coming from a global bank, but that has a crossover with what our government and nonprofits are working on and different customers are working on. So there was this thread between what all these organizations are doing, and the commonality became, okay, well, how do you protect them, but make them super effective in what they're trying to accomplish? And once we did that in this SaaS platform of Replica, we had to automate everything. And that we had the confidence that this was going to be a successful entree, a successful product for the world. It has evolved based on what the customers have said. Oh, could I use that for my cloud engineering? Could I use that for my AI experimentation for people that are not necessarily technically strong, but can I put them into a Replica environment where they can go do that innovation type of work and they're not going to hurt themselves, they're not going to hurt the organization? And the answer was yes. And the customers have pulled us along this journey. The product is great. Could it also do this? And we haven't had to really change the product much. We just continue the natural evolution of it, and it has expanded the value proposition for each of our customers.
I think just you talking through it there really defines why there was room for you to build what you have. And I think also some of the undertones of the business. And I'm conscious, I want to talk about it now, but I know we were going to unpack these later, because the
Mhm.
main thing I really want to make sure that we do at this point is obviously the report that you guys have put out is full of so many golden nuggets. Arguably, we could probably do a mini series on how much we could talk about from the report, and so comprehensive. But there's one thing I really found interesting, and I think this is worthwhile highlighting at this point, because also something that you guys help with. And it's the idea that businesses are basically being forced right now to choose between speed and security. And I think this has probably been a little bit of an evolution at the moment with the advancement of technologies and the way that we're able to build things so quickly and efficiently without having to come from a really specific coding background. But when did you think that this is now starting to become the norm, that this is happening?
The norm as far as the sacrifices that people have had to make from the beginning. We had those sacrifices in our previous jobs, but in the life of Replica, every customer we get into was always doing a trade-off. They say, okay, I know I can't pull down this unknown third-party tool and develop on it and pull in my data because that's probably going to expose my data. So maybe I'll mess around with this tool and then I'll put it into production and then I can go do that testing. Like, well, that doesn't make any sense. You're going to have a problem there. And every single customer is making these trade-offs of, okay, the evolution, the software has always moved fast, but now the speed every day feels like there's a new game-changing capability coming out from Anthropic or from OpenAI or from people that are building off of those platforms. And how do you even consider keeping up with that if you don't have a place to go do that safely and effectively? So even in our own business, you start to feel behind, right? You say, I can't keep up with this. So am I going to lose my business momentum because of that? No, because there are ways like Replica to go address that, where you can bring in data, you can bring in third party products, third party services, have some trust and control around what's happening with your information. That's where I've seen we've seen it in every customer. And we've also seen that you can solve some fundamental problems they've had for years and haven't been able to articulate because the approach is different, and nobody else has taken the approach that we did and built up in the background we did. So everybody else has addressed this from a point solution perspective. Oh, okay, I can solve this from lock down my browser, give me an anonymous browser or lockdown browser, harden my operating system, give me that golden image that's really secure. Oh, give me that network that's routed and segments my network by the activity that's happening. Those are all good and fine, but they're only one piece of the puzzle. So as we had to build up from infrastructure, operating system, applications to networking to human activity to identity, that is the comprehensive way of doing that is what we found is the only way to reduce or eliminate that trade-off of am I secure or am I productive? And
Yeah.
we're able to do both.
Yeah, and obviously there's a real value out there in this fact that almost a mic drop at the end there, where you, like, I've made it where you can do both. But I also think there has been this scramble of, if we don't innovate fast enough, we'll get left behind. And I
Mhm,
think the challenge with that then is the cutting corners element that can come into fruition, and this fear of, okay, we'll make an exception here. Well, surely it will be okay, and we can always come back to it, or that kind of mentality. But when we put that into practice inside an organization, what does make one exception actually mean? What could the impact be there, where you think, oh, it'll be all right this one time, when it
mhm.
comes to all of this that we're talking about? Because ultimately, you're setting yourself up for probably more risk than you realize.
Yeah, it's almost like technical debt, but it's risk debt that you're creating. This one exception might be fine for the business overall, but then you compound those risks and those exceptions over time. And then you look at it in aggregate, what position have we put ourselves in? Some people might track those exceptions, but generally you'll track that exception and not think about it again because, oh, those people are going to, the users are only going to use that exception for one purpose, right? I think one of the stats in the paper we put out there was the fit for purpose. There's a misalignment. And so some people might have had an environment or a server approved for a certain activity. And maybe it was a malware server or VMs. okay, yeah, so we're going to make an exception. Go do that because we believe you've put the security in place to protect the organization. They say, oh, hey, but that malware lab that you have, could I actually do some testing in that of some third party products? Can I pull down something? Just, you guys are isolated. You guys are protected in there. So you have an approval. Just let me use that for something else. That's what happens a lot is that I've made this exception and now it gets used for something that wasn't necessarily it was originally designed for. So yes, your exceptions can compound over time, and if you don't track them, you create all this risk debt that you've got and have to figure out this exception debt. But then the second part of it is these things get used for the purposes they were not designed for, and that takes it way away from any controls that you might have had in place previously.
Yeah. And I think when you really put it into perspective as well, it's sometimes that like it's if you flipped it on the other side, when you look at marginal gains, for example, it's the compound effect. When you make these small little things, whether in a positive or negative way, you don't realize how actually over time, when you turn around and look back, how far or how much it's actually grown and impactful it's been. I think there's a real, I don't know whether maybe an educational piece or just the fact that I always say the saying, you don't know what you don't know, and you don't always realize that impact is building. And one thing that you referenced about earlier, though, as well, is AI and agents are, of course, massively accelerating this problem because companies want autonomous systems, they want them interacting with sensitive data, with different environments. How are you thinking that things like NHIs and agents are impacting things, whether it's like inside Replica and what you're building there and what you're offering, or just how it's maybe impacting businesses themselves as well?
I even had this conversation with my co-founder this morning, and we use Claude and different AI tools internally for some of our development. But it is still a human in the loop, human on the loop type of activity where it is facilitating, augmenting what you're doing, but it's not making decisions for you. So when I see the non-human interactions and that type of work, how to see agents, how does agents work in this architecture that we've built? It becomes we have to treat every one of those as its own distinct identity. And the way Replica's control framework was set up was to treat every human as a distinct entity with distinct access permissions, distinct data permissions and controls of what they can and can't do. Taking that automatically to an agent and what the agent can do, that's an easy translation. So that is, we're one for one, put an agent into a replica environment and it has the same type of controls that you would have for a human. Now, you'll see in the release coming up for us is some agent specific lighter weight environments that humans don't necessarily have to log into, but you want to gain those controls and have an agent encapsulated in a replica environment and have some of these agents be able to talk to each other. How are they going to collaborate together within this control framework? And that's the level up. The next piece of it that you have to take is great. We have the containment, we have the place where you have to have the full observability to what's going on, but you have to have the ability for flexibility in agents because they just operate differently than a person would. People don't scale in the way that agents can scale. And you can have 1,000 of them talking to each other and spinning other agents up and doing different work for you. So you'd have to operate in a little bit of a different architecture. Thankfully, we were designed in a way to support that, but it is for sure a new evolution of how you can do secure environments.
No, absolutely. And it almost sounds a little bit overwhelming, but that's probably also because I'm not the technical one in this conversation. So it's
It is a lot, but it's something that we want to take that burden. We take that burden on for our customers. The same way
yes.
we created these environments, so they didn't have to. They just literally can log in and click, create the environment for this activity, and you have everything done for you. It's the same thing for in this new world. It's just now the scale of that from number of environments will be much different than the one-to-one for a user, a human logging in.
And I think if that doesn't reiterate the importance of having companies like Replica out there that are able to take away, because I think sometimes that's what adds into the fear element that people have when it
Mm,
comes to adopting the technology or truly understanding it because it feels so overwhelming. If you have somebody that can take a significant amount of that burden away and say,
mm,
we can really do a lot of this for you, that then naturally you're also just going to feel so much, not just safer, but more confident using. And I always say as well, within cyber, this is technology that's just second nature to a lot of people here. We talk
mhm,
about it so often. When you're not in cyber or something that's really heavy, like SaaS slash AI leveraged, actually, the AI is a much scarier tool. Whether it's
mhm.
agentic, generative, no matter what, people are scared of it, and they don't necessarily see. how it's not as advanced in different environments. And it's always a really interesting conversation to pack there. But I think one thing I also want to mention that you just really naturally reiterated as you were talking, because everyone talks about AI right now. And if you walk a conference floor, obviously we're in the peak of conference season at the moment, there's something going on almost every
Yes.
day. But if you're walking the floors, one thing that you will see is agentic, you'll see AI, you'll see these kind of buzzwords posted everywhere. But I think one thing with Replica is AI is embedded into the workflows rather than just
Mhm.
bolted on top. And the way that you just talked about it there, the way that it's just a natural extension of the way that you work within the business, etc. You leverage the technology, but also build from it. Was this intentional? Was it just, did it just naturally happen that way?
So, and I wanted to clarify, and specifically not to scare any of our existing customers. There is no AI that is embedded in their platform that they don't know about or is behind the scenes. So none of our customers should be worried on that. But the way we use it and think about it is two different things. One, yes, we always, like my co-founder's master's degree was in AI and game theory, and that was many, many years ago. I will not age him on this podcast, but it's always been around. I've programmed AI languages like in my college days. So this is not new. The generative and agentic AI and the approach to that is the new piece. But if we thought about how Replica provides these environments, controls all these thousands of pieces of content or data that could be exposed, that had to be an AI approach. And our patents are out there, you can go read them. But when you think about the spectrum of AI, that starts at an expert system, which you probably consider a level zero, and then evolves up into more automated and automatic capabilities that evolve over time. So that's how we have thought about it from the very beginning. And really, it's been over when we've been thinking about this approach and documenting this approach. It's been well over like 12 plus years of the approach to this problem, how we're approaching this problem. And now, when you go to implementation, now let's think about okay, what is it that we're supporting and protecting? So we want to support people experimenting with AI to take the worry out of the organization and take the burden of how do I create environments that are safe and effective for people to use. Great. That is a use case Replica supports today, and many of our customers are using us for those purposes. We had a customer that signed on in January, and we usually, okay, great, we sign you on. We spend a few days to talk about the onboarding and let's get you configured correctly. They said, no, 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 I need that today because I have this AI tool I need to pull down. And that was the whole reason we bought Replica. Okay, we got it, gave it, deployed it to that day for them, got them immediately in because things are moving so fast. And they needed to try out and test these things for their business. The business can't stop because they were waiting to test that. So that is right in what we have here and today. As we evolve, the piece that I want to focus on is how do you get access to the latest capabilities for sure, but how do you trust that the way that you control the infrastructure and how your systems interact are you're taking advantage of the controls that exist out there from these major providers. And I'm treating these providers as almost infrastructure providers, the same way I've treated cloud providers in the past. So the same way I treated AWS, Azure, GCP, I'm now thinking of Anthropic and OpenAI as providers, resources for us. So how do I access or allow my customers to access a Claude model or any of the models within Anthropic? Well, I'm not going to let they shouldn't go directly to them. They should go through a Bedrock or a Vertex, depending on their preference, because I can put additional controls for them around data not getting populated back into that backend model. That's important. And if you have the burden on the customers to do all that, you've got plenty of customers that are sophisticated enough to figure that out. But as you said, for the rest of the world, you don't want them to have to worry about that. Let's us take on that burden for them and make that easy. And because today it'll be Bedrock and Vertex, tomorrow it'll be something else.
Yeah.
And that's my job, our engineering team's job, to keep us in line with that. And that keeps me a little bit more focused, keeps our customers a little bit more focused, so that their time and resources are best spent going to their business. What is the business thing you're trying to accomplish? And so you don't have to worry about, okay, well, it's going to take me a week to spin up this lab or a month to spin this up. And are we sure we put the right controls in place? No, just have that taken care of for you.
You all of that is super relevant. There's one thing that you mentioned there that just reminded me of something in the report when you were given the example of the customer and the fact that it was a case of, oh no, like we've got something internally we want to deploy, utilize. And I think that reiterates back to how rapidly innovation is happening. But also, there was a stat that I think is worthwhile highlighting because it was basically the fact that nearly half of organizations said their most sensitive work is happening in environments that aren't fit for purpose. And I imagine this is because they haven't found Replica yet and they're in that exact situation of, oh, well, we want to use this, we want to leverage this, we want to deploy this, but can we afford to risk like waiting or whatever? So actually, let's just go ahead and do this. And suddenly they've left themselves vulnerable. But I'm interested to know, do you think leadership actually realizes how bad that gap is?
I think the report calls out that they don't, unfortunately. And it's not because there is the lack of a desire to. I think it is understanding when you talk about we talked about the compounding risks, right? Or where the risk debt for making these exceptions grows over time. But if you're not in the cyber field and you're not in security, that is hard. Understanding the impact of those risks is difficult because you have to have a system, an architecture kind of understanding to really what is the downstream effect of the decision we just made. So asking a board to understand that or a leadership team of a large organization, that is a difficult thing when you've got people that were hired for to grow their business in their specific areas, whether it's finance or it's healthcare or it's just a general business, right? Business growth. That's their specialty. So asking them to understand the details and downstream effects of some of this stuff is unfair. So that's, I think, the problem. And so now we have to communicate that better so that they quickly understand. That's the big part of this report is opening the eyes of every one of your organizations. 100% made exceptions in this past year. And that is not the first exception they've made. So assume they've made dozens, if not more, over the last 2 years and over time. You really need to address that and addressing that and just having the open conversation with your security teams, your security officers, and their approach to this and saying, okay, can we take it if the approach is working fine, if the approach is not, can we take a different approach now? Can we look at the architectures a little bit differently? Can we look at some of these activities differently? And that's how I always focus on the activity, right? People focus on the technology, they focus on the data aspects, and those are all pieces are important. But if I don't focus on the activity, which gives me the end to end, what is the downstream, what are the effects of everything happening, what are people trying to accomplish, that's where that is the box that can put these problems in and that really help our customers solve those problems.
Yeah, no, I think again, I think it's an important topic to cover and highlight because like we mentioned earlier and you just referenced again there, I think the challenge right now as well is a lot of the customers obviously that you're serving, they're not in cyber necessarily, like they might have
Mhm.
security people in the team and obviously a lot of people have CISOs and security practitioners and so on now. But in the day-to-day individuals within the team, they're not working with this technology. They don't quite realize the vulnerabilities and I think it's there's definitely this educational piece that plays into it, but I think it's ultimately again you need it to be easy because there's a saying, but it's if you create like a barrier to something for someone's normal day to day, they're less likely to want to use the new product even if it solves the problem because they're like, oh, that makes my life harder. And that's the
Right?
unfortunate reality of it as well. So you need something that just seamlessly integrates that makes life easier, right? And I think that's exactly what you guys are doing. What I want to ask now, Chris, though, is we've obviously I've picked out a few things from the report here, but like I mentioned at the start, there is so much that you unpacked there that's really valuable. To anybody that's tuning in, is there anything in particular that you would say if you don't have time to read through this entire report, which
Mm.
you should, people should
Yeah.
take the time to read through it, but if you don't, if there was one thing that they should take away, one key element where you were like, if this was the only thing you were going to learn from this should be
Mhm.
it, what would it be?
The overall theme of the report is that we just have to understand the velocity that's changed in the world. And most people, if you're in IT, realize it, but the velocity of things have changed. Understanding that we weren't able, the infrastructure wasn't able to keep up with the evolution that we had previously, and it absolutely can't keep up with it the way we are now. And I'm using infrastructure in the very broad term of just the information technology or operational technology that you're using to accomplish your business goals. And doing that while maintaining control is a really one of the hardest problems that you will have, regardless of what technology that you're using. And so I'd say just acknowledging that and saying that there are ways to change your architecture and change your approach to this. And some things I think, if you look at like the Mythos and other models coming out, that are exposing all the custom code issues. And if and let forget the Microsofts of the world. If you've got your own, you've built your own things within your organization, you've got to be very, very worried at this point as far as, okay, well, what are all the vulnerabilities that I might not even know about? So just understanding the velocity of the world has changed. Taking a different approach to this will save you not only time, but will give you a different control approach to this that will allow you to focus on your core business activities and enabling your business. So I think that's the last thing I would say on that topic is my job is to enable our security teams and our security providers to enable the business, right? That's
Yeah.
why that Replica is not a security product. It is an enablement product that gets used by the CISO and the CSO and the CTO and the CIO and all of their engineers and their team members and their business users, right? It's being able it's across all these organizations, which is really exciting for us.
Absolutely. And I think again it's a powerful topic to talk about because I think it just resonates to so many teams, but more
Mhm.
so when you break it down to its simplistic terms like you did there, it really puts it into perspective as well that this is helping a pretty significant number of people. It's not just the CISO you're giving a full night of sleep to, it's the rest of the team as well. And ultimately it's that ROI often people think is a financial thing, but sometimes actually it's the time as well because then what you're able to then put that time back into is even more of a bigger investment than specifically looking at, oh, okay, how much money does this make us? And I think ultimately that is such a powerful thing in this industry as well. Well, the last thing, because Chris, like I mentioned at the start, or even before we hopped on, I was like, we could probably talk all day long, but I'd be interested to close out here and look at if we were to fast forward into the next 6, 12, 18, 24, 36 months. In your opinion, what do you think a secure infrastructure for high risk work is going to actually look like, especially if people are implementing and taking on board kind of reports like this, but also
Mhm.
using Replica?
Sure. If I have my way, and then the way the world would be in 3 years, which is the AI and the providers around that become, as I said earlier, just like the cloud providers have become, they are foundational resources for people to take advantage of. And so if you look at them in that light, in 3 to 4 years, it won't be every day something gets disrupted, but we've gotten to the state of, okay, these providers have changed how I potentially operate and they have sped up certain aspects of my business and I rely on them, but I've put an architecture in place to trust that I'm not exposing my business to excessive risk and have the data controls in place that I need to make sure that we're properly protecting our own information and our customers' information. That's the place, is that they become almost like the infrastructure providers as far as you expect them to be there, you expect them to operate properly. And obviously you need to mitigate if that model does not exist anymore, what happens, right? Because that'll become the next problem of things to worry about is what if this model gets compromised in some way? What do you fail over to or not? In the next few years, we all have figured those things out. And so this just becomes fundamental, another resource and part of the technology, part of the platform, and having the controls in place to just continue to run your business, and business will be running at a different pace, different velocity.
I mean, just an exciting few years ahead there, really, isn't it? And I think not just from what you talk about there, the fact that how much more efficient and everything this will be, but I think also just from the innovation perspective, where you talk about, well, we're going to see more kind of challenges that come into play. And it's not just this linear pathway that we can fully predict. Actually, it's equally, I think, daunting as it is exciting around the fact that we can't fully predict. We can say, this is what we're hoping things will look like, but ultimately, there'll be a few hurdles along the way, and it will be
Mhm.
exciting to see where things can pivot. But Chris, this has honestly been an incredible episode. I think what you guys are doing it just brings so much value to teams. And I was just going to say security teams there, but it's not just security teams. So I can't just say it biased to one demographic. But I think an incredible report to anybody tuning in. I just highly recommend. And what we'll do, we'll put it in the comments of the post. So if anybody wants to have a look into this, absolutely do. I highly recommend the read. But this has been a fantastic episode. I would say we're going to be catching up at InfoSec. So if anybody wants
Yes.
to follow along and have a little teaser to see the aftermath of this report coming out and some further conversations once we see people really take this into into consideration, make sure to tune in. And plus, it's always fun when we get to do it in person. But that's it for today. So, Chris, thank you so much for joining me. It's been an absolute pleasure. To everybody tuning in, make sure to like, subscribe, share this episode with not just your security peers, but anybody you think this could be relevant to. Thank you so much again, and I will see you all next time for more conversations that are shaping cyber.